Also, I read about, I've read a lot of things that you've written on at Medium, actually, on Medium. And one of them being what you explained about your internship experience at GitHub. It wasn't in
Hmm.
detail, which is what I understand, that you cannot share everything because of the NDA and all that, all those factors that come into play. But
Hmm.
you mentioned that you worked on Primer. Since you worked at GitHub as a design systems intern, you worked on Primer, that is GitHub's open source design system. Can
Hmm.
you tell us more about what that is and what role did you play?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, because GitHub's work is all open source, I can definitely talk about that, I think, a little bit more in depth. So what I worked on while I was there was, I think, a couple of things. One of the big things that I worked on, obviously design systems teams, I guess, for people like don't know, design systems teams are there to support product designers. So a lot of design system teams will create and maintain a set of components, and color styles, text styles, content guidelines, all of these different kind of things that kind of, I think, my manager said it really well, is that like design systems isn't like trying to box in product designers. It's more so as a guardrail for product designers to not go like too off the edge. Um, doesn't mean that you can't explore things, but yeah, it's like a good kind of like set of foundational guidelines. So I worked on that team, and what I personally, my personal project that I worked on was like helping designers basically not have to start from scratch every time. So a lot of our designers work on, obviously you draw out sketches, right? But then when you kind of start to explore things, you do this in medium fidelity, and you want to make sure that things are flexible, and you also don't want to like have to start from a blank canvas and recreate the same kind of issue page every time, or like a repo page every time. And so my project specifically worked on like these templates that would allow product designers to kind of have something to start with, and then they can work off of that. I spent a lot of time focusing on the exact like right shades of gray and like very, I think, nitpicky like details when it comes to graphic design, because like, with design systems, like these components become really widespread, and so you really have to put a lot of intentionality there. um, Another project, and the other project that I worked on was some core UI things. GitHub was starting to think about like a big visual refresh, which they released recently. Um, and one of the things I worked on was more about like the empty states. So a lot of our empty states were pretty inconsistent. I did an audit of those, and I redesigned kind of like how we might look at them, and I did a lot of different like explorations there. Definitely that was more towards like the product design, I think, line between design systems and product design, but still very heavily like, because I was working on core components and getting feedback on that, is definitely kind of more in the design systems realm.
Nice. I also saw you've shared a somewhat a Figma file on your website. So if you can share your screen and give a walkthrough of that as well.
Oh, of the GitHub work?
Right.
Yeah, let me do it this way. Cool. Yeah, so I guess I can just like open this up. Can you all see that still?
Yeah.
Yeah? Awesome. Yeah, I mean, yeah, this was kind of like one of my big projects. Essentially what I was saying about prototyping templates, um, this is basically like what I made for my project, which was like a way for product designers to not start from scratch. So this is like what a repo page might look like. And instead of having to like kind of go through and recreate all of these kind of smaller icons and components, um, the product designers could just have this and then start playing around and like completely destroying it however they needed to explore different things. We did this, yeah, for like web. We also did some mobile stuff. I also played a lot with like constraints. I think I really leveraged Figma here because like all of these frames, like we would drag them out and they're actually like responsive in the actual Figma file. Um, but yeah, like, I mean, I think I got like some feedback about like how exactly like what fidelity we needed these in, and whether the responsiveness was useful. And I think it did help like a few different designers like get their own projects kind of like off the ground pretty quickly.
Nice, man. This is really awesome stuff, especially since a lot of designers are not well versed with design systems. Like I've
Mm-hmm.
noticed certain words are used very interchangeably, like component libraries, design systems, style guides. A lot of designers assume all of it's the same, which is so
Huh?
not true. Like there are such nuances between each and every one of them and they have a niche of their own. So this is great. I feel like as a getting the experience of working as a design systems intern and working around design systems is like really cool.
Yeah, I definitely think like design systems supports designers in the same way that like systems, like internal tools and teams might support engineers. It's very similar in that fashion.
So how did GitHub work out? What was your process? And can you tell us more about what your internship process was?
Yeah. So for interviewing, I think the most difficult thing about um, trying to get into GitHub was probably just the fact that like so many companies really do rely on referrals and school recruiting. Um, I think I was very like 1 in 100. Like I got an email and it ended up working. Um, so yeah, like I got an email from the recruiter. I remember talking to her. It's very casual at first, and I think it was very much like, "What is your design process? It's like, how did you get into design?" Very similar to like this interview. Um, and after that, I had to do something similar to like a portfolio presentation. Um, Specifically because GitHub is more like focused on coding as a product. And the design systems team is also very much like designer engineer hybrids. I had like a coding interview, but it wasn't necessarily like back end coding. It was more of like, do you know HTML, CSS? Do you know how to do responsive design type stuff? And that was a very interesting interview. I think like very unique from what I know now. And then after that, GitHub was also unique in that I had a lot of different like chats. Like I had a lot of, I think like here's like one meet the team interview. I had a couple, I think, one-on-ones with like my manager, who would be my manager for that summer. I even had actually, and I love that they did this. I had a diversity and inclusion interview where we specifically talked about like what kind of things I did outside of school, what kind of things I did within my own community, and how I like grew from my community and impact and gave back to that community. And I'm so happy that they did that because it's a really, really great way to kind of like think like challenge myself to not only like recall what I love doing with my community, but also almost like make a promise to the company that I will keep doing that in a way. So yeah, that's kind of how that interview process went. I usually had debriefs every day that I had an interview. I usually had a debrief with my recruiter at the end of the day.
That's great. So that would have reduced your kind of anxiousness as well, that you had a better idea of, okay,
Yeah,
this is how the interview went, and you don't need to worry about certain things. And there are certain things that you can improve or work on.
of course. Yeah.
That's great,
Yeah.
man. Are there any tasks that you can tell us more about that were given to you during your application process?
I don't know that there's so many tasks as much as like very like standard like portfolio presentations. I feel like they do at every company. Um, I guess I can talk a little bit more about that. Portfolio presentation in general. The first time I applied for any design job, I didn't know that you needed a portfolio, like a slide deck. And a lot of companies I think also advise like candidates like, oh, technically you don't need a slide deck. But I do think like it's really useful because when you're looking at like a website like portfolio, it's really meant for like a recruiter to spend 5 to 7 minutes on it and like move on after that. And so you want to keep it short and concise and give like kind of high level information. But when it comes to portfolio presentation, you have like 30, 45 minutes to go over like 1, 2 projects maybe. And so you can really like go in depth. The audience is completely different, right? Like there's totally different use case of you trying to tell a story about your project rather than just trying to get as much information out the door in a concise and like digestible manner. And so that's, I think, the one of like the biggest like tasks that I did have to end up doing for interviewing was just like making a slide deck, making sure it fit my style, making sure it fit like my portfolio. Everything was kind of cohesive brand wise for like me as an like an employee or as a brand of myself, like that kind of stuff. And then also just making sure that I was including the right fidelity and amount of information and covering all my bases.